In today's episode, we'll discuss agency org design and how the structure of your organization is an important factor in facilitating growth.
All right, Sei-Wook. So this topic is something that we've thought about a lot over the years. One of the things that we come across over and over again when we talk to especially the smaller agencies is how should they think about their org chart, and how can they scale better to help the founder not wear so many hats. And I think in this on this topic today, we'll talk a little bit about some of the important factors with regard to organization design and the org chart. So let's start first with why is the org chart and org design important? Why is it important for agencies to even think about this as they're scaling?
Yeah, maybe kind of thinking back from our early days, we started out the two of us and we started adding more team members organically, and we didn't really think about org design much. It was more like just increase our capacity to do more and more work. But at a certain point, it just became unclear who reports to who, what everyone's responsibility is. And it kind of in the early days, it makes sense for everyone to wear a lot of hats, but it got murky as we continue to grow in size.
Yeah, a lot of org design is effective org design needs to also reflect the type of work that you do and the way that your project or engagement teams are constructed. So maybe we could start there. Especially looking back on the type of work that we did in our agency, which was website design development. And so I think in the early days it was basically just maybe one of us, a designer, a developer, and that was pretty much it, right? We didn't even have PMs at the time. Maybe we played a little bit PM, the designer played a little bit PM.
Yeah.
So that was like the project team. And so, what was the org chart like then?
Yeah, the org chart. Yeah, it was us and a bunch of people executing on projects. You might have designed some projects in addition to some designers. I might have coded projects in addition to some other developers. So it was very fluid in terms of, and especially, as founders and who did, a lot of the work as we kind of grew and built up. Yeah, we continue to do the work. We continue to do project management and even later we called account management, but like managing the client relationships. The org chart was very flat in that way. There weren't also many titles or levels where there weren't, senior designers or, junior designers. Everyone had a very kind of flat title, including us across the board.
Yeah, it was just designer. And then, although it was clear that some were, more advanced than others or could handle more responsibility, but I don't think we distinguished much in the early days. And I think amid that kind of, and it was fun because there's a lot of projects coming in and we're just trying to keep our head above water and just doing the work. But at a certain point, I think there was there was a need, right? I think as we, let's say, start to have more designers, there's, I think, a desire for some degree of leadership beyond the two of us, especially in with regard to hey, career growth, mentorship, performance management, all those things. So I think those were kind of the early kind of indications that we needed more structure. So did you remember how we kind of evolved from there on?
Yeah. Yeah, part of it also was around responsibilities and what each level of person did on a project that could have been different from another person in a different role. So basically, we kind of went through and created departments and departments of the company, which could, we could have been the leader of the department. So just defining, what are the departments and what are the different levels or roles within those departments. And if there's a natural progression for somebody in that department to become the leader of it, that kind of emerged, but everything was very kind of organic in that way.
I think part of the evolution was, as we developed departments, the projects were getting bigger as well. So that's another fact. So we talked about how in the early days, it might have been just a designer and a developer, but then, as projects got more complex, timelines became larger, more stakeholders, we needed to add a project manager. We might have needed to add a strategist or maybe even like a copywriter, or in some cases, as the the technical side got more complex, we need to bring in QA. And so, I think the project teams went from small 2 to 3 person teams to, at some points there was like 8 people, because you might have multiple designers, multiple devs, 10 people even. So, I think that required us to, think about having more disciplines than just a couple design and development, and add more leadership to the org.
Yeah, and I think to your point, as the projects got complex, it's more like role definition. You know, should the software engineer who's coding the project also be doing the QA for the work? Is that the best use of their time? Can we define the role and the focus for each person? And we ended up kind of splitting up responsibilities as much as the project could support it. As the project budgets increase, there's more room to kind of define roles. And as the volume increased, you had enough work to support each of those people. And then in some ways, we also use fractional. It could be a contractor who did QA. So, we may not have had the capacity early on to have, their schedules filled 100%. But and that's kind of another thing. It's just thinking about when to go from a contractor to full time, but all kind of within the same realm of like understanding like what department, what role, and who reports to who in the organization.
Yeah, and the one of the pitfalls of kind of specializing more roles within a engagement or project team is at some point though, like, you create extra overhead, you create extra friction, and also it kind of silos the work a little bit sometimes. And so, to that point, I think I remember, for example, and we've been down this path multiple times where, we used to have designers that were able to do like the brand side, the UX side, and the design side, and even project managers. So like, this is like kind of end-to-end designers that like were really, carrying a heavy load. But then we started to split it out and specialize more, right? We had like UX designers, we had, brand designers, we had, visual like web designers. And so like we used to, and then we even had junior designers that supported just kind of like preparation of the assets on these projects. And so, you start to, increase the headcount on all of these projects. And all of a sudden now you have like, you went from 1 person to 4 people. But, as we found through, some of these projects, if the budgets don't increase proportionally to support that, you're in for some pain in terms of margins, and that's a pitfall I think that we experienced, a few times where, the teams got a little bit too bloated.
Yeah, yeah, I think for sure. So we've definitely seen some evolution of growing the team, growing roles, and then also the contracting and simplifying the org structure. I think the other thing that we found was when you have one person departments or a few people departments, you just need to be clear on like who they report to. Like for example, we talked about QA for a period of time. Like, all right, who does QA report to? Is that into project management? Is that into software, software engineering? Is that a technical thing? And when there isn't a clear path, it ends up just going all the way to the top. So whoever doesn't have a direct manager, the leaders, the CEOs, the founders end up managing those people directly. So, soon you're managing a lot of different people across the whole company.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so, to make this helpful to folks listening, maybe we take a step back, and if we're, speaking especially to, founders who are, as of today, wearing many hats, and they're kind of feeling that kind of pressure to maybe bring in more leadership, build out some kind of structure within their org, what kind of advice can we share on like how they can be more deliberate about org design?
Well, the first thing for a founder is understanding what your own strengths and weaknesses are. If you're, founders come from a lot of different backgrounds. So someone comes from like a creative strategy background where they're very much involved in the work and they have a impact on a lot of the work going out in the company, and maybe the biz ops or the finance side of the business isn't kind of the core focus, but because they're the founder, they're taking on that as part of their responsibilities. Maybe that's an area where they can expand in terms of bringing more people on to support in their roles.
So understanding, first of all, strengths and weaknesses. So that's a good
Mhm.
one. I'd add to that, like, just visualizing the org. And this is why like the org chart is such a powerful tool. Just didn't know any better and didn't visualize for a long time what the org could look like. But once we started, using the org chart as a tool, it was really helpful because I think what we do is we map out, okay, like, like these are the reporting lines, like the two of us at the top and like who reports to whom. And then also like what kind of departments fall under us, and within those departments, what's kind of are there levels to it? Is it flat? And we started kind of really getting a sense of like, all right, you have some people that are stragglers here, kind of reporting directly to to one of the founders, and like what do we do with those folks? And are they better served by moving them under a department? Is that something where we actually have to address it, and maybe it's not a role that we can support any longer? So I think seeing it all visualized, has was one step that people can take. And I think
Mm.
once you map out where you are today, then you can take the step of you know identifying holes, gaps, and then I think what we started doing was, okay, what could our org chart look like 6 months, 12 months from now? Part of it might just be, hey, like if we stay the same size and we're just trying to clean it up, what could that look like? But then another facet of it could be like, hey, if we experience growth and we're investing a lot in trying to grow this aspect, or this service offering, or this department, like what could that look like? And I think starting to put in like we'd have different colored boxes, I think, to show, okay, this is like a prospective role that we can fill, and try to grow the company in this deliberate manner. And from there came like the discussions around, okay, that's a role we never had, we need to create job descriptions for that, and who does that person report to, and what are the ways that we measure success for that role? And so we start having those discussions. So I think that whole exercise, we started, once we started doing it, it became like a quarterly thing, right? Where we'd revisit it, and it just became a powerful tool for deliberate org design.
Yeah, and part of that, mixed in with that, was performance management, understanding who are the people on your team now, and what are the potential roles that you want to fill. Is there a person that you know, given 6, 12 months or additional training, could grow into a role, or maybe they're already playing that role and you just don't know it,
Yeah.
and it's finding the right seat for that person in the company. So yeah, it's definitely talking with everybody to just be on the same page about where we're um, trying to go. And the whole, you mentioned job descriptions and just being clear about all the responsibilities for each of the roles. Going through that exercise with the team and showing people, hey, here's the 4 or 5 levels within the department. If you want to get to the next level, here's here are the skills that you need to grow in, here are the responsibilities that are different, and then just mapping out a career progression for people.
Yeah.
That whole exercise was super helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, just to kind of bring it back to maybe, our own experience, this exercise was incredibly helpful. And it probably was the thing that gave us confidence of the two of us, taking ourselves out of the day to day at Barrel, and kind of moving on to the Holdco. Because I think, I remember the org chart exercise of like, what does it look like with the two of us inside the org? And then what does it look like once the two of us are out of it? And then, we were able to clearly identify, okay, like, you know, with Lucas moving to the CEO role, and also you kind of like, handing over the reins on the people ops side and other things, right? Like who else needs to step into that role? And all those things started to kind of make more sense. And it just gave us the confidence of like, all right, like these are clear gaps that we need to help fill. And then that allowed us to kind of, execute that move.
Yeah, and that whole process was, it took years to execute on, but and I think for us, a lot of it was, letting go of the things that we were doing for so long, and
Yeah.
trusting, and just being clear on, if there are gaps, helping the people who are going to be filling those gaps, with if there's training needed, but also just trust it, like letting people learn, make mistakes, and then guide through that journey.
Yeah. And so, it's hard to fathom when you're, just wearing so many hats and like just trying to, make it day to day. But, kind of one thing to strive for as the organization grows is, as the founder, the leader, you're really trying to get to a point where, your main lever of impact is the org design, and then recruiting the right people, and, holding them accountable to results. And really it just becomes, you know, and to use like a sports analogy, you're becoming really the owner slash general manager who, kind of identifies the different positions, and also like the different folks that need to be in the coaching roles as well to make sure everything runs. And so, yeah, it becomes such a high leverage position, where yeah, you're less in the day to day, but you're more about making bets on the right folks and making sure you've designed the org in such a way that the combination of these people are going to yield great results. So I think that was a big learning. It took us a while to kind of come to that conclusion of like, hey, this is a people focused business that we're in agencies, and so if anything, it's about understanding org design and putting the right people in the right seats that makes all the difference.
We've been talking a lot about scaling and growth and future roles as you kind of grow in size. I think the reality that we've seen is business isn't always up and to the right. You could go through kind of stagnant periods or periods of declining revenue, or the beautiful org chart that you created that you wish you aspire to. It may not be the reality right now, and you may need to make changes in the business that are kind of the opposite of what you put in place. Yeah, any kind of stories you could share there from our
Yeah,
experiences
I
on that?
mean, look, we
Yeah.
did a whole. I remember we did a bit of a round trip there, where I think there's a period in Barrel Growth where we were like really excited about kind of the achieving some scale and building the org and like really specializing roles within it. And so we might, a good example is like, hey, like bringing in more like marketing resources, business development resources, or on the resourcing resource, somebody who's handling the resourcing or trafficking, and then a recruiter on staff. So like those are all roles that kind of had been handled in like a platoon manner, where different people were sharing those responsibilities. But then we thought, oh, okay, as we're growing, we need people who are dedicated to those roles, and like, let's bring them in. It's another headcount. And, as long as the revenue and supported it, it was fine. But then I think, once you experience a little bit of a decline in the revenue, that overhead, because a lot of these are non-billable resources as well, it just starts to not make sense anymore. And especially if you're decreasing headcount, you no longer need a recruiter. If you don't have that many projects that you need to staff people on, the resourcing person no longer needs to be there as well. And so the many hats that the team wore and then spread out, you got to kind of go back and put the hats back on again. So we started to went from de-hatting to going back to wearing several hats. And so yeah, that's the cycle of business as it goes up and down. Obviously you want to be on the upward swing, but sometimes that's not always the case. And so yeah, having lived through that, it's actually one of the things that we learned is you actually have to get ahead of that as soon as possible. I think there's I think one way that companies can get into trouble is as revenue goes down, they still, for whatever reason, I mean, we all have, it's vanity, ego slash pride, whatever it is. You want to maintain the facade of like, hey, we built this. There's almost a sunk cost kind of fallacy around it, where like, hey, look, we put all this, effort into building this infrastructure. Let's preserve it. But you're not really facing the business reality of it, and so you're burning a ton of cash while your business is unable to support these costs. And yeah, you almost have to kind of see the warning signs, make the decisive move to kind of slim it down, and then once things rebound, maybe you could rebuild it again. But then maybe you find other ways to do it without adding headcount, and maybe you're more careful in the future. So I think that's just kind of
Yeah.
the experience that we've had in that regard.
Yeah, the perspective is helpful, having, gone through both directions for that. Yeah, yeah, and the challenge is, sometimes internal when, if you extracted certain responsibilities from one person to several, and then if that, as the team contracts, having to put those hats back on, maybe, a challenge. But I think it's just being clear and transparent with the team on what's happening, what's the situation, and
Yeah.
what's the path, and how is it going to be different this time. And you may take a completely different approach, like you mentioned, like having a full-time recruiter, going from that to maybe more fractional resources. So you don't necessarily lose the role or the person, but you may decrease the cost substantially. So yeah, different strategies, and that person can still be on your org chart as, hey, we have someone in the talent recruiting end, but it's not a full-time salaried person that is on there.
100%.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. One last thing I want to just talk about before we wrap is, just when it comes to leadership, right? Because, we're talking like, as you get big, you might, have like a director level person, or, you might start having VPs and you might build out a whole C suite. But I do think like as you scale, you come across different types, and we're talking managers, right? These are people who are overseeing teams, they're coordinating efforts of a department or, a function, maybe a bunch of accounts or whatever it is. But as these folks are in charge of other people, I think one of the things that we become more sensitive to is how high level is this person versus how involved can they be. What I mean by that is when you're really scaled up and you have layers of management, you don't expect that let's say it's like a VP of, design or whatever it is, right? You don't really expect that person to roll up their sleeves and start jumping into Figma and designing stuff. You kind of go, okay, like what their role should be is, kind of hiring the right kind of creative directors under them, and then, having the right kind of senior designer, like just, they should just really be, they're the GM of their own departments and kind of manage performance that way. So that's at the scaled up level. But if you're at a much more, leaner structure where it's basically like, design director and maybe some designers underneath, you want that person to have the flexibility and the wherewithal to jump in where needed and be able to do some of the work. And so I think that's very important because sometimes you might hire the wrong person at the wrong time, and that could be very, that can lead to some problems if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think it comes back to like role definition. Like when we think about what this person is actually doing as a director or manager, like how much are their time is spent on, say, one-on-ones with their team, org design, recruiting, different aspects that are, we'll call it like non-client or non-billable, versus I think you can kind of outline all that. It's like, you know what, actually 50% of their time should be allocated to supporting these clients. And it may not be like very like on the ground, but maybe it's working with the execution team on like the first pass of a design, for example, or thinking of the strategy or whatever it is. And every kind of organization is different. But at a certain scale, then maybe all their time is spent on quote unquote like management or non-billable tasks. But it's always a balance. But just understanding the specific like how are they using their time and what's the best use of their energy. And the other thing is, you kind of think of it also from, we talked to, in a prior recording about like utilization and like what are targets that you should be hitting. You can look at it also from like utilization of your entire team. If you have many, many people on the team that are kind of executing and, have high utilization, like the director's cost and utilization can be factored into the whole team, and you can actually yield, pretty strong results. And that person doesn't actually need to bill that much to the client. So I think it's really just understanding at what scale, how many people they're managing, and yeah, what specifically they're doing at the company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I mean, this has been a great discussion on kind of the importance of org design within an agency, and the sooner you can get started in really thinking through the org design, it's going to yield a lot and help you grow in an intentional manner. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Till next time.